This is Ohio State wide receiver Emeka Egbuka.
This draft class stinks, and he's actually good. So I like him actually in the first round here. So let's get that right out of the way. He's the all-time leader in receptions, averaged 89 yards with CJ Stroud, then played in a pro-style offense with Chip Kelly. He's more of a dirty work, big slot type of player, which is fairly low ceiling. But in this draft class, I'm drawn to it just because he plays big. He can play in the condensed bunch sets, which we see in the NFL. And I think that he can beat man coverage more so than this kind of type of wide receiver. So the Cooper Kupps, the Tyler Boyds, that kind of spectacle of player, that's what I'm looking at.
Don't undersell the class while overselling the player. That's what you did in the first 5 seconds. This is an interesting profile to me. 6'1", 202, had a 4.48 40 with a 1.50 10-yard split, and added some nice athleticism on top of it. 82nd percentile shuttle, 76th percentile vertical. He'll be 22 years old until October. The big question here, and I think Matt Harmon put this phrase exceptionally well over at Reception Perception, is Emeka Egbuka a slot mostly player or a slot only player in the pros? And when you look at his time at Ohio State, and really just this past season, he saw 81 of his 111 targets out of the slot, and he finished the season with 81% of his routes out of the slot. So we don't have to answer that big question as of yet, but since you like him so much, what were the major elements that you were drawn to?
Well, I think that he can play in 2 wide receiver sets still, and he's not just a slot only player. I think you're gonna have to do it and he's not gonna be playing X receiver for you just because he doesn't have the vertical speed, and you don't see him beat press man coverage because there aren't that many press man coverage routes. So
Correct.
we'll see if he can do that. It's definitely a projection that a team would have to be willing to do. But to me, I just see him. He wins where the most efficient passes are, which is intermediate and over the middle of the field. You can see him on some crossing routes. I think he has good hands on seam routes as well. And he's got a really great feel for zone coverage, which is the go-to coverage in the NFL. I just really think that he's going to be trusted. And I think that the better your quarterback is, the better production you're going to get out of him because your quarterback's going to trust this guy to win on the backside, to be in the right spot on zone coverage for the scramble drill stuff. And then on top of that, he's a really good run blocker. So I can't sell you on this like number one wide receiver, going to be on the outside, nothing like that. So the floor is really high. The ceiling is kind of mediocre. But in this draft class, like this is a guy that I actually want to be targeting just because I can see this guy being a very impact player, and he's going to actually help you win football games.
To reiterate a few of those points, he weaves between defenders in zone coverage extremely well. He's very comfortable in that area. Like he's so adept at navigating through trash over the middle of the field and finding spots to be his quarterback's best friend. And I also thought he used his hands and his size to get through that trash and again around zone or off corners. There were also so many wins on option routes. Like he slow plays the off corner in front of him, stutters, and then cuts inside or outside. And those are just the easy receptions.
Yep.
And now in the NFL, when you look at slot wide receivers, you know, I think for so long we had this perception across the league that, to be honest, there are these white small guys. You can go from Danny Amendola to Wes Welker to Julian Edelman to Hunter Renfrow, so on and so forth. Now across the league, they are these bigger bodies. And in many offensive systems, they can be second tight ends / third wide receiver hybrids. So in order to do that, you have to be a great blocker. And his blocking is some really fun stuff. Like you see him crash down on linebackers, attack them on duo and inside zone. He was even a lead blocker on a counter play versus Michigan State. He finished another Michigan State defender on the ground to the ground as a lead player on a toss play. So like those elements, I think a lot of offensive coordinators are going to be attracted to. I will say, because it was a slot and because he previously played with Marvin Harrison Jr. and then this year played with Jeremiah Smith, he was given a ton of free releases with drive routes on the outside, rub routes down the field, motion at the snap. You know, those sail patterns that were so often a big play for Ohio State where it was a love of the game route on the outside. And then he sold like an inside pattern to force the corner's hips inside and then cut it outside. Like those are exceptional, but those were like layups for him because of the space that was afforded to him in Chip Kelly's offense.
Yeah, I see the exact same thing. I would just say that there is a craft to doing some of those, and I think that, like you said, where the head is going inside and finally breaks back the other way. The marks that he's going to, always on time. He plays with good pacing, and there's some tempo in his routes. So he just dominates the off coverage routes, which is like a lower like priority list for like you're looking for wide receivers. Like you need to find somebody to beat press man coverage. We just don't know if he can do that. But against off coverage, it's basically as good as it gets for somebody that's going to be running 4.48 speed, which is better than like the Cooper Cups and the Tyler Boyd and some of the other slot wide receivers, but it's not exceptionally fast either. And then the agility was in the 74th percentile as well. So I just thought he was like very polished, super high floor. And I think that some of those option routes against the off coverage, he can run a big post route, a corner route, a seam routes, option routes, all that type of stuff, just because I think his feel for when to break, how to manipulate off corners, I think is basically as good as it gets for somebody with his like good but not great athletic profile.
Okay, I have some questions for you. So, because if your A dot in the NFL is going to be around, I don't know, 8 to 9 yards out of the
Hmm.
slot, and you're going to play there 80-ish% of your snaps, to me, you have to create something. You have to be good after the catch and win in that area. I thought he was poor in college. It was a major negative to me. Like he got knocked back on contact with yards after catch constantly. I don't know if he had play strength in that area of the field. He doesn't have a wiggle. To me, his best yak moment was actually his final catch against Notre Dame this year. He was their manufactured touch player a lot, and he was not exciting in the least as it. In fact, they had 3 wide receivers, including Jeremiah Smith, that had a number of screens on the team. He, by
Yep.
far and away, had the lowest yak per reception on the team in that area of the field. And, 65% of his receptions we're talking about here were behind the line of scrimmage to 9 yards. And so if you're kind of like a catch and fall specialist, like before the catch, it's great. But I just didn't see any of that sixth sense stuff or power or elusiveness or explosiveness after the catch on a consistent basis they would really
Hmm.
want from a player like this to spend a first round draft capital on.
Yeah, in my weaknesses section, I say he's just not a missed tackles force guy, and that's just the reality of the situation. He's not
So
somebody
you
you're gonna
don't
be.
think he has to be?
No, because I think he's just so good, like winning, like just like on normal intermediate routes, underneath routes, and not like the manufacturer department. But I think that he does enough in that intermediate level. I think that's like the most efficient pass. Is like it's not the manufacturer touches the most efficient pass. Like the CJ Stroud routes over the middle, the Matthew Stafford routes thrown over the middle. Like those are the most successful plays in the NFL, and that's where he thrives at. I do think that he's got enough speed on the option, the out routes, the posts, and the corners and the seams where you can see at least some yards after the catchability just based off like the big crossing routes. He's not going to be shaking guys necessarily with the ball in his hands. I think that he is at least a little bit bigger than some of the slot guys. So like around the sticks, I think that he can drive for a first down. So yeah, it's a different type of slot wide receiver. So there's like the manufactured touch type of guy with a lot more explosiveness and agility. And then you have like the polished route runner types. And I think he's like closer to the JSN model of slot wide receivers than he is to like the Pop Douglas, Wandell Robinson types. And I
Well,
just much
I'm
prefer.
not putting him in the Pop Douglas,
Right,
Wandale
right,
Robinson
right.
category. Like he is, and I know people don't like to helmet scout, but when these college programs become very established, they tend to, recruit somewhat similar
Yeah,
players and get them in the pipeline. He is close to JSN, I think. I will also go down with the ship saying that JSN created more highs, I thought, in his
I
game.
agree.
And I think Egbuka is kind of more steady
Hmm.
in that department. Yeah, look, pre-catch stuff, I think he's really good. I just like to see players create a little bit, And if that's not the case, yeah, he had some contested grabs, but I just don't know if you're going to get explosiveness out of him. Like, I don't know because of that if he can get to a Khalil Shakir like level who creates a whole bunch after the catch and creates those big plays and also has the ability to work inside these zones and stay in a string with his quarterback and all that level. And I think Khalil Shakir is really good in the NFL, but it kind of points to, I'm not saying a cap or a ceiling because, again, I think the safe word is thrown around a lot with these slot types, even if they do miss when they're drafted in round 2 and round 3 and that sort. But I'm just kind of putting him in on that spectrum a little bit.
Yeah, I think he's much better than Khalil Shakir is down the field, like the in the 5 to 15, 5 to 20 yard
Interesting.
radius, and Shakir is better than he is in the screen game. And I think that's just like the difference between the two. And then also Emeka, he's just so good as a blocker, and I think that's going to be a big difference. So he's going to be more valued by the NFL team, especially a good NFL team with like a good quarterback than he is on other teams. Like he's not the manufactured touch guy, but I don't think that the best teams in the NFL like necessarily need that in the slot. Like if you have a
I
high
think they're
level
looking for
guy.
explosives.
Yeah, I think he can create some explosives too. It's just not going to be like the fancy explosives, but like a 15-yard completion over the middle because he found a soft spot in zone is like that's an explosive play. Like that the big out route, the option route for a first down. Like, yeah, he's not going to be a number one wide receiver. So I think that's the thing with him is like you have to be willing to draft this guy, conceding that you're not going to completely hit a home run with this pick. But in a class I don't think is very good, I think that you're getting a double or a triple with this guy. And I think a late round one is kind of where I sit with these guys. And I think there's a chance that he can be pretty productive in the NFL without being like the groundbreaking player that's getting double teams. He's not going to be on the outside all the time. Unless the mystery box of the press man coverage stuff, which we didn't see yes or no on, and he's actually very good at
Right.
that too. We don't know.
So some of those press coverage snaps, because we talked about it in the Luther Burden video. Hopefully everyone's subscribed to the channel, watch that
Mhm.
profile. We have a ton of others. So be sure to check one out after this one. I believe last year Egbuka had 16 catches last year from an outside alignment and only 2 catches versus press. Luther Burden had 15 catches as an outside wide receiver and 1 versus press. The year before for Egbuka, 7 outside catches the year before and then 1 versus press. So it's really just
Yep.
3 versus press coverage that he's had as like a true outside player. And if he's
Mhm.
going to be a 2 wide receiver set player, he's going to see a whole bunch more of that in the NFL.
Yeah, just they're going to be all those bunch sets really close to where all the offensive lineman is and stuff. You're not getting as much press coverage and stuff there. So these offensive coordinators, like the modern NFL, like these guys are in motion all the time, and they're not facing press man
Well,
coverage
we
all
didn't
the
get this
time.
love in Luther Burden's profile.
Yeah, I think that Luther Burden's ceiling is definitely higher than Amika's. It's just I trust Amika way more than I trust Luther Burden. And for a GM that wants to take on the risk, like I will tip my hat to them if they turn out to be right. But I think more times than not, Amika's just going to be a better player on the averages. So I think in this draft class, I'm going to stick with that. But he's not. If you're looking for a number, like you're like the Titans or somebody like that, and you're looking for like some spark, this is not the guy. Like to me, this is like the last ingredient for a team that's trying to win the Super Bowl. Then like the Patriots need this guy. I think like there would be some differences in like what type of team I want him to go to.
Yeah, and again, this is often termed as a safe caliber of prospect. You just mentioned the Patriots. I'd point to them going with Jalen Polk last year, and that obviously wasn't a safe pick. And I trust obviously Emeka Egbuka much more than I trusted Jalen Polk last year. I hear the storyline or this comment a lot when we talk about, oh, he was purely a slot player in college, and so that almost certainly means he's gonna be a slot player in the league. And people bring up Justin Jefferson and
Oh
everyone
my
thought Justin
god.
Jefferson was
Yeah.
slot. And no, no, no. This is something that pops up a lot. And I
Right.
just want to say that Justin Jefferson moves differently.
Oh yeah.
You know, like he's one of the best route manipulators in the NFL. And I can't say that Emeka Egbuka showed that at the college level. So I just want to
Yeah.
throw that out there because I'm sure one of these comments before they get to 13 minutes in. The comparison I went back to is Robert Woods. Since you
Hmm.
mentioned the Titans and we've talked about
Yep.
the Texans and all these teams, like the Robert Woods comparison during his time with LA and kind of being that end of the line slot player that also was an extra tight end at times. And look, he was a second round pick and moved from Buffalo to LA and all this stuff. So um, I I really did like Emeka Egbuka. You know, just when we're thinking about these prospects, I did keep asking myself, like, what elements of his game do I think are difficult to find? Did I see high level plays, spectacular efforts, some dynamism to his game? And sure, there were some of them, but there were a bunch of others where they might not do the pre snap, the pre catch stuff as often as Emeka Egbuka, but I did see them do the other things more often than
Mhm.
double E. And that's why I think it's so difficult to rank these wide receivers after Travis Hunter.
Yeah, it is. It is very difficult to do. I mean, there's the pros and cons of all these guys are so vastly different. If you want some good tape, he beat up Mike Sanders still pretty good, and then he also beat up Georgia pretty good. A lot of off coverage routes, but like a lot of high leverage situations in the red area, which I do think kind of showed off some of his cases. Yeah, I think the Robert Woods one's like a perfect like median comp for him. I think like the really modern version of this is some guys that are very high up in the league leaders for receptions every single year. So we'll see. I think it also has to mean something that he was the all-time leader at Ohio State in receptions. Like obviously he played an extra season, unlike some of the early declares. But when
Right.
you're Ohio State's had some dudes, and he caught more passes than Jeremiah Smith this last year. So I think there's something to that.
All right. That does it. I just want to point out the league leaders in slot receptions last year, just to put this into frame of mind.
Yep.
All right. JSN at 83, Khalil Shakir at 67, Wandale Robinson at 67, Josh Downs at 54, and Lad McConkey at 54.
Yeah.
So There are other guys that go inside and out, as we've talked about. Drake London is an example of that. Amon-Ra St. Brown is an example of that. They've caught 50 and 47 respectively. CeeDee Lamb, an outside to inside player. So it's not just one prototype playing in this spot anymore. The NFL has certainly expanded because it gets them the free releases and a bit more space and some matchup advantages. All right, go and check out the rest of the profiles on the channel. If you're new around here, hit that subscribe button, leave a thumbs up, and we'll check out the next one.